Haggai, same book, chapter 2. If you've never heard of that, don't know where that is, don't know how to find it, if you go to Matthew's relatively in the center of the Bible, the first book in the New Testament, and then you go left, go back towards the beginning, 2 or 3 books, you'll find Haggai. We've been in am I too close to that, Lance, or am I good? All right. We've been in Haggai for 2 weeks, and we've been in a study of minor prophets for several weeks. We studied Jonah, and then we studied Habakkuk, and now we're studying Haggai. And we've learned several things. One of the things I hope we've learned is this term called minor prophets. Why are minor prophets called minor prophets? Because they're small books. There's no other reason that we know of, that I know of, why they're called minor prophets. So the beauty of that is Phil started Haggai last week and taught chapter 1, and I'll teach chapter 2 today and finish Haggai. So it's not like it's going to take us a long time to get through like some of the other things we've studied. So they're real quick. The other thing that I think is helpful that I think we've talked about, but I want to emphasize today, is the minor prophets are not long narrative books with big stories. Most of the minor prophets are very specific stories, very specific things that God is teaching or doing at a specific set of moments in time. For instance, if you wanted to, in this town, read about the Marshall plane crash, that starts after Marshall had been a college and a university for a very long time, right? Maybe they weren't a university when that happened. Anyway, that's a very specific thing that happened at a very specific time. It's not a comprehensive study of all of Marshall University or all of Huntington. It's just a very specific thing. And that's kind of what's happening in the book of Haggai. Phil taught last week that the story in Haggai starts in the book of Ezra. The people were commanded to go rebuild the temple. And in Ezra, they start out really strong. They go back. They start rebuilding the temple. They start with these big sacrifices and this big event to start the foundation. And then what happened? They got distracted. They started building paneled houses for themselves and completely forgot that they had a specific task to do. But then God comes and speaks to them in chapter 1. In the very end of chapter 1, God convinces them to start working on rebuilding the temple. And the temple at that time was the place where God dwelt with people. And so Haggai, more than a lot of other books, has very specific dates. And so the end of chapter 1 talks about the 6th month and the 24th day. Now, their calendar is different from ours, and I'm not going to try to explain calendar systems and use the correct months. But for our purposes, for my brain to work correctly, June the 24th. The 6th month, the 24th day. Okay? Which is a significant day for some people. Maybe not everyone, but for some people, June the 24th might be significant. So as we start chapter 2 today in Haggai, I want to ask you a question to consider as we talk about Haggai chapter 2. Do you listen to God? Do you listen for God? Do you hear him when he speaks? How many of you had a parent who had a voice that sounds like mine? That was booming. I have a booming voice that I don't use very often, but if I need to, I can really get your attention. Sometimes it's real helpful. The other night, I was talking to someone, and my wife said, "Be quiet." We were at a play. The play's going on, and I'm talking to someone. I'm like, I don't have a quiet voice. It doesn't exist in my body. But sometimes in my life, I wish God would just be like, "Hello down there," and I'd be like, "Yes, sir. What are you doing?" Do you ever feel like you want to be Samuel? Samuel's asleep in his bed, and the voice of God comes, and he's like, "What's that? I don't know what that is." But God doesn't speak to us that way. But if we're listening, he still speaks to us. And that's what I hope we learn today. There's not as much about what's happening with the people in Haggai's time And I don't think that God's going to call any of us to go to a city of ruins and rebuild a temple. So there's not a lot of application in those things. But the God who told Haggai to tell the people something is the same God that's telling us something. And so I hope today we can learn something about God in our study. So let's jump in, Haggai chapter 2. And I'm going to read on my phone because it's easier for me to see. And I'm reading from the CSB, and if they have it up there, it's going to be ESV. So the words will be a little different. The ideas are the same. Haggai chapter 2, verse 1. On the 21st day of the 7th month, July the 21st. So how long from when they started? A month. A month after they got out of their paneled houses and started working, God comes again and says something. The word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. So God speaks to Haggai and says, speak to these people. Who's God talking to? Speak to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah. So Zerubbabel is the governor of Judah. He's the civic or political leader, right? So God's talking to the political leader. Who else is he talking to? Speak to the high priest, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, and to the remnant of the people. So he speaks to the civic leader, the governor. He speaks to the high priest, the religious leader, and all the people. So what he's about to say is not for a specific group of people, but for everyone. And so what does God say? Verse 3, who is left among you who saw the house in its former glory? How does it look now? Doesn't it seem to you like nothing by comparison? Now, they're a month into building. And Phil showed pictures last week of what the AI version of the temple would have looked like and what the AI version of the destructed temple might have looked like. And so I'm not sure what reflective question God's asking here. Is he asking, what does it look like now that it's been ruined? Or what does it look like now that you've started working? But either way, he's asking, are there people among you who saw what it used to look like and are looking at it now? What does it look like? Any of you ever built a house? Any of you ever built a house and walked in after the foundation is laid and the walls start going up, and you walk around and you think, this makes no sense to me. I don't understand this. How's there ever going to be enough room? How's it ever going to make sense? How's it ever going to work? There's some people in here who've built houses and that doesn't faze them. They walk in and they can see the wall's going to go here, and we're going to put the load-bearing wall here because that's where the roof ties in, and we're going to put a partition wall here because it's not bearing any weight, and they understand all that. But reflectively, we often live in this time space where we look at what something used to be and we wish it were still like that or like that again. Because we have no ability to see what it will be or could be. Can any of us see the future? You often wonder what you would tell yourself 10 years ago about today if you could go back, or 20 years ago. Some people are like, oh yeah, I think, don't do that. Or, man, you should have really done that. I mean, if I could go back 25 years, I'd buy stock in Apple, wouldn't you? Or NVIDIA. Anybody know anything about a little company called NVIDIA? They make GPUs. They are worth billions now. They're the Microsoft of 2026. You say, what does all that mean? Some of you have played on AI, and NVIDIA is the big player in AI. They're making all of these cool, funny pictures that people are sharing. But God asked this reflective question: who saw what it used to look like, and who sees what it looks like now? Why did God ask that? Let's go to verse 4. Even so, be strong. Who did he tell to be strong? Zerubbabel. Why did he tell him to be strong? This is the Lord's declaration. Who else does he tell to be strong? Be strong, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, high priest. Be strong, all of you people of the land. This is the Lord's declaration. So God asked him a reflective question. Does it look like what it used to look like now? And then he tells him to be strong. Why did he tell them to be strong? What happens a month after you start a big project? What happens when you're starting something and it doesn't look like you're making any progress? What happens? You get discouraged. You get discouraged. What's the very next word in your Bible? After it says, this is the Lord's declaration. An imperative word in my Bible with an exclamation point after it. Work. You know where broke people should go? They should go to work. You know where poor people should go? They should go to work. You know where rich people should go? They should go to work. You know why you should go to work? Because God made us to work. There is something very satisfying about working. Now, I'm not talking about a job. I'm talking about doing something, working at something. For some people, working is using their mind and not sweating. For other people, working is sweating and not using their mind, but doing physical labor. But we should work. We should not be lazy. God created a little animal that I step on and squash a lot called ants. You ever see an ant sitting? They're always moving. Even when they're in the big group, they're moving, they're working, they're staying busy. What does God say after he tells them to work? For I am with you. Isn't that pretty awesome? God tells them to go to work, and then he says, I'm with you. And then here is one of the most amazing things I think about this part of what God's saying. This is the promise I made to you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit is present among you. Don't be afraid. Does anybody know when people came out of Egypt? Who led the people out of Egypt? Moses. What part of the Bible is that in? Exodus. If you're looking at your Bible, and I told you to go to Matthew and go back towards Genesis, Matthew's in the middle of the Bible, so near the end of the Old Testament. Genesis and Exodus are at the beginning of the Old Testament. A lot has happened. What we're reading about today was in about 520, 530 BC. The children of Israel left Egypt in 1400 BC. Almost 1,000 years, and God says, I was with you then. How many of you would like to stand up and talk about what happened in the year 1026? And remember what God told you to remember about what happened in the year 1026. Any history buffs in here know anything about the history of the world and what happened 1,000 years ago? Alex probably does. He's smart. He put his head down because he knew I was going to call on him, right? 1,000 years ago, God says, remember that like it was yesterday. Here's something I want you to take away. We dwell in time. We have watches and phones that keep time. We have a start date and an end date to our life. Everything is structured in time. God doesn't. There's a song we sing that says all of God's promises are yes and amen. And God promises don't expire. If God says, I'll be with you, he's not going to be with you till the day is over. He's not going to be with you till the week's over. If he says, I'll be with you, he'll be with you as long as you exist. God's promises never expire. 1,000-year-old promise. And he said, hey, remember that like it was yesterday. So then let's keep moving. For the Lord of armies says this, once more, in a little while, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. I will shake all the nations so that all the treasures of all the nations will come, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of armies. The silver and gold belong to me. This is the declaration of the Lord of armies. The silver and gold belong to me. Isn't it crazy to think that all of wealth belongs to God? We, as a nation and as a community, are relatively wealthy. The poorest of us in this room, if we went around and calculated wealth and income, the poorest person in here, whoever that might be, is far wealthy than 80% of the world. So you might look at what you have and say, man, I'm really struggling. Things are tough. I said to somebody this week, they were in our house and they were talking about their financial position. I said, you're wealthy. They said, no, I'm not. I said, well, It's a Wonderful Life told me if you have friends, you're the richest man in the world, and you've got me as a friend, so I think that's pretty good. But God has all wealth, and resources are nothing to him. What's he going to do with that wealth and resources? Verse 9, the final glory of this house will be greater than the first, says the Lord of armies. I will provide peace in this place. This is the declaration of the Lord. So at the very beginning, he said, is there any among you who saw what this used to look like and are discouraged now by what it is or where you're at in the work? And what does he say at the very end? It's going to be far better when I'm done with it than where you started. It is impossible to imagine what the future holds. And it is impossible to look back over your life and realize all that God has blessed and given you. It's impossible. And some people in this room have very small children. And they think, man, life is tough. We have some very small grandchildren. And let me just tell you, as frustrating and as difficult as children can be when they're very small and don't listen, very small grandchildren are the bomb. You know why? Because you give back. You know why else? Because they think you're awesome. And you don't have to correct that. You don't necessarily have to discipline them and change everything. Now, they do need some discipline, and some of my grandchildren need me to straighten them out. Some of my children need me to straighten them out, but that's a different subject. But God can see the future and see how much better life will be for us than it has been for us. Now, that's not a temporary statement. That's an eternal statement, right? Life may not be good from here until you get to heaven. But when we get to heaven, it's going to be significantly far better than we can ever think, hope, or imagine, right? Okay, so God gives them an encouragement to be strong. And why should they be strong? Because he's with them. Now, go down to verse 10. We're going to jump ahead another couple of months. On the 24th day of the 9th month, so September the 24th, again, maybe a significant day for somebody. In the second year, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai. This is what the Lord of armies says, ask a priest. So who's he specifically talking to here? Talking to the priest, the religious leaders. And he asked another reflective question. Ask the priest for a ruling. If a man is carrying consecrated meat in the fold of his garment, and it touches bread, stew, wine, oil, or any other food, does it become holy? The priest answered no. So God's using something they understand, consecrated meat, and holiness, or dedicated, to teach a principle. And the principle is, if I have something holy and I'm around other things that are unholy, does the holy make the unholy holy? Is proximity to holiness enough to make one holy? The answer is no. Here's the principle that I think God is teaching. Were they where God told them to be? Yes. They left Babylon and came back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. They had changed their position. But just because they were where they were supposed to be didn't mean they were who they were supposed to be. If you go stand in a garage tonight, will you become an automobile? No. If you come sit in a church service, do you become a Christ follower? No. Proximity doesn't change our life. Our life only changes by who we become, not where we hang out. Now, the second thing is a little harder to understand, but it's the opposite of it. Then Haggai asked, if someone defiled by contact with a corpse, such as any of these, does it become defiled? The priest answered, it becomes defiled. So they had a custom and a law that said if you were set apart and in a position of holiness, and then you touched something that was defiled, then you became defiled, right? It was like ceremonial cleansing. So then, verse 14, Haggai gives the answer of why he asked that. Then Haggai replied, so is this people, and so is this nation before me. This is the Lord's declaration, and so is every work of their hands. Even what they offered there is defiled. Every work of their hands is defiled. What does that mean? What they were trying to do was in their own strength, and it wasn't working. They came back to Jerusalem, chapter 1, with the idea to build this temple. Rather than getting involved in what God was doing, in their own strength, they started doing what they wanted to do. And it didn't work. So he gives another explanation. Now from this day on, think carefully. Before one stone was placed on another in the Lord's temple, what state were you in? Or what was your heart position? When someone came to a grain heap of 20 measured, it only amounted to 10. When one came to the winepress to dip 50 measures from the vat, it only amounted to 20. I struck you, God says this, I struck you, all the work of your hands, with blight, mildew, and hail, but you didn't turn to me. This is the Lord's declaration. You ever seen somebody digging a hole, throwing the dirt up on the bank, and as they're digging and going along, the dirt behind them is falling back in? And all of their work, they're working hard, but their work is not amounting to anything. Sometimes our spiritual effort is like that. I start efforting to try to get better at following God, but I'm doing it in my effort, not in His strength. And I'll never get there on my own merit. So, man, that's pretty difficult. It is. But sometimes God puts things in our way to slow us down so we'll recognize Him. Because look at what He says in the very next verse. Verse 18. From this day on, think carefully. From the 24th day of the 9th month, from the day of the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, think carefully. Be reflective. Think carefully. What is the next verse? Is there still seed left in the granary? The vine, the fig, the pomegranate, and the olive tree have not yet produced. What does it mean when there's still grain in the winery or in the barn and these plants have not produced? The word that comes to my mind is potential. You put one seed in the ground, and if it's a fruit, you get lots of fruits on the vine. You put one seed in the ground, and if it's a tree, you get a tree that bears lots of fruit. There's potential in that. So God says, from this day forward, there's still potential. There's a preacher I used to listen to who would repeat oftenly, if you're not dead, God's not done. As long as God's giving you breath, there is potential for you to do something. And how does God close out this statement? But from this day on, I will bless you. So God tells them to be strong, that He's with them. And then God tells them to work hard, and He will bless their efforts. Now, the very last section starts in verse 20. The word of the Lord came to Haggai a second time on the 24th day of the month. Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah. I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. So who's he talking to this time? He talked to everybody. Then he talked to the priests. Now he's talking to the governor, the civic leader. There's no reflective question here. And I'm not smart enough to tell you why God asked a reflective question of the priest and doesn't of the governor. Can't figure that one out. But let's see what God says to him. I'm going to shake heavens and earth. I will overthrow royal thrones and destroy the power of the Gentile kingdoms. I will overturn chariots and their riders. Horses and their riders will fall, each by the brother's sword. On that day, this is the declaration of the Lord of armies. I will take you, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, my servant. This is the Lord's declaration, and make you my signet ring, for I have chosen you. This is the declaration of the Lord of armies. How powerful is it for God to look at Haggai and say, go tell Zerubbabel, I've chosen him. I've chosen him. How powerful is that? To hear from God that he's going to overthrow armies, turn things on their head. There's a lot of things happening during the rebuilding of Jerusalem. The walls were torn down, the temples were torn down, the temple was torn down, the houses were torn down. As the civic leader of that region, there's probably a lot of fear that he lives in an unprotected place. And here God comes along and says, I'll protect you. I'll be with you. I've chosen you. Now, all of this is in the Old Testament. If you go back and count, 28 times in this chapter, God makes a declarative statement. I'm with you. I'm for you. This is what I say. You say, well, does that really matter to me? That's Old Testament stuff. Does that really matter? Let's look at three different things for each three statement that God made. The first statement God made says to be strong. If you'll put Ephesians 6:10 up, will you go to Ephesians 6:10? Do you have the ability to do that? It's there. All right. Ephesians 6. Does anybody know what Ephesians 6 is about? The armor of God. There's a whole section of God saying how he protects each part of us. And the very beginning of that is to be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Not in our effort, but in his might. So to be strong. The second one, John 14, 10 to 14. If you'll go there. John 14, 14:10. Do you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? Words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me. Believe me that I'm in the Father and the Father is in me, or else believe on the account of the works in themselves. And this is the verse that I think really kind of captures that God will do more through us. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do, because I'm going to the Father. And whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything, I will do it. I don't understand how that works. My brain can't logic that Jesus said we could do greater things than he could do. How's that possible? I don't understand it. Can't explain it to you, but that's what Jesus told the disciples. They would do greater things than he could do. That's overwhelming. Now let's go to the last one. 1 Peter 2. Did God choose us? 1 Peter 2, 4. Will you skip ahead to verse 9? Thank you. If you've got time later, go read all of 1 Peter 4. It's pretty incredible how God chose us. But verse 9 says, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him. There is a whole theological discussion about who can come to faith. And I'm not going to debate that or argue that or try to explain that right now. All I can tell you is I believe that God the Father and God the Son came up with a redemptive plan where Jesus came to this earth and paid the penalty for sin to choose those who believe in him to go to heaven. Now, whether there are chosen people to be saved and people who won't be, I'm not going to argue that. But God chose us because he sent Jesus for us. That's all pretty incredible, isn't it? That God would choose us and be for us. Now I'd like to make an application. All of that's possible in one way. What's the one thing Haggai had to be doing for the people to hear what God said? Had to be listening to God, right? Haggai had to be listening. Now, I have this random box over here. One of my toxic traits in life is that I don't get rid of things. And so I'm going to do a little show and tell illustration. Anybody know what this guy is? It's a what? It's an office phone. You don't know how you disciplined kids when this hung on your wall. And anybody probably under 30, this used to hang on the wall in a house, and that was the only way you could talk to people. A sign of discipline is this guy right here. If you were talking to people you shouldn't have, you'd get a short one of these. But if you were really wealthy and your parents trusted you, you could get a long one of these, and you could take it off the kitchen wall and walk in the other room and shut the door and have a private conversation. But to talk to people, you had to have one device, no apps you can put on that guy. And then, by the miracle of technology, we upgraded and we went from that with a cord to one of these. This, you could walk around anywhere. You could take it outside and answer the call. Guess what else isn't on one of these? No apps on that guy either. And then we upgraded to little guys like this and little guys like this. Anybody ever play Snake on one of these guys? And then my favorite phone device is this guy. Anybody ever use a Palm Pilot or a BlackBerry? What could you do with all of those? What could you do with all those? Talk. What did they not have? Distractions. When you first start following Jesus, it's like that. You're singularly focused on him. You're listening to him. You're listening for him. You're focused on him. Now, what's this called? What's it called? An iPhone. Now, would you like to participate in a little exercise with me? Yeah. My wife says no because she knows what's about to come. If you'll get your iPhone out and open up an app called Settings, and at the top of Settings, if you'll search for something called Screen Time, and if you scroll down a little bit, it'll give you the option on Screen Time to look at all activity. And if you go to all activity, it'll let you select week or day. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll be able to go back to last week, so you'll get a 7-day picture. And at the very bottom of that, it's got most used apps. The most app I used last week was Messages. I spent 6 hours and 38 minutes on Messages. Now, to my shame, I'll tell you the second most used app on my phone. And the third most used app on my phone are games. When I'm working and waiting on something to happen, I play games, because if I don't play a game, my mind gets distracted and I forget what I'm doing. So I play games. Now here's the illustration. At the bottom of that, there's show more. And at the bottom of that, there's show more. And at the bottom of that, there's show more. I had to go down 4 pages of apps to get to an app called Phone. I would imagine there's some people in here who have 0 minutes used on their phone app on their phone. So what are you trying to say? If I'm not listening for God, I'll never hear God. And if my connection to God is so blurred by other apps in my life, I'll never know that God is telling me to be strong. And I'll never know that God is telling me the potential I have when I align with Him and He blesses me, that I can do things far greater than I could ever think or imagine. And if I'm not listening to God, I'll never know that He's chosen me to follow Him. It is really, 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 really challenging to listen. Our daughter left this morning to drive home, and so I got out of bed earlier than normal. And I was wandering around the house looking for something to do. I was prepared to talk. I got up earlier than normal when I prepared to talk, and so my mind was ready. I had everything in my mind I wanted to say, but I was fidgety. I didn't want to start doing something else and get this off of my mind. But I didn't want to sit and keep looking at this, because the longer I look at it, the more I think to say. And I've been talking 35 minutes, which is plenty long for me. But I couldn't sit still and listen. I couldn't sit still and just say, God, what is it you want me to say? And so my challenge for all of us this week is to find more time this coming week than you found last week to listen to God. Find a spot in every day of your life to listen to God, whether that's 10 seconds or a minute or 10 minutes. If you've not done that all week, 10 seconds is a huge improvement. If you do it once or twice a week, try to do it every day. But find time to listen to God. Because if you don't listen for Him, you'll never listen to Him. All right, I'm done. We have some discussion questions. What have you learned from Haggai today or last week? Which lesson from chapter 2 encourages you the most? To be strong, that God blessed your effort, or that God chose you? And how can you take intentional steps this week to listen for God to speak? And if you'd like to come play with the old archaic phones, you're more than welcome. All right, we'll take 5 to 7 minutes and have some discussion at your table, or gather up in the rows. Thank you.